and a good afternoon, and welcome to you all to this session of the Circular Plastics Conference 2021. This conference is a part of the Circular Plastics Initiative, which is the research collaboration on circular plastics between DPI and ISPT. And this initiative, we try to boost circularity of plastics on an industrial scale. And we address this in the entire value chain from an international perspective. And we focus on technological, value chain and societal challenges which are lying ahead in relation to this, this endeavor. And we do this together with our industrial and research partners. So that is what we try to achieve in the Circular Plastics Initiative. My name is Roland Kostenji, and I am the program director of this Circular Plastics Initiative. During the session of this conference, you can ask questions via the chat, and we will try to address those as much as possible during the panel discussion, which will be after the presentations. And during the session, we will have questions which we pose via polls. And if correct, you also see this on the screen. And the link to these to the poll you will also find in the chat. And after the session, we will have a network session where we will have virtual rooms where you can directly interact with the speakers. So that is meet the speakers. And then at this moment, I would like to hand over this session to Jaap den Doelder, who is a professor at TU Eindhoven, sorry, and also principal researcher at Dow Chemicals. He has set up this session and is also the moderator of this session. So please go ahead, Jaap.
Thanks a lot, Ronald, for the kind introduction. And yeah, I'm excited. I think we're going to have a very nice session today. We had a few sessions before. We're kind of halfway with the various sessions of this conference. And today we're going to talk about mechanical recycling. And you already see the four expert speakers that we have lined up for you today. So what is mechanical recycling? Well, that has been around for quite a while. And for certain polymer types, certain plastics types, it's quite successful. But we're really trying to grow that, you know, to make other polymer types part of the game. Yeah, in the Netherlands, Belgium, and Western Europe, we're kind of 70-30 when it comes to dealing with plastic waste. No landfill anymore, a lot of incineration still, and then about let's average it to 30% mechanical recycling. But there's a lot of challenges regarding quality, quantity, the economics, the whole infrastructure, and that's where this total conference is helping us with. Today, we're mostly going to focus on the technological side of things in mechanical recycling, but through the stories of the four presenters, we will also hear about collaborations, about partnerships. I think we can give you some time to enter now the code. I will also do that myself, because what we want to do today is a bit different from the previous sessions that you may have joined. Is we're going to ask you the poll question 4 times before the presentation, and as you will notice, each poll question will be very relevant to the presentation. But we want to basically gauge from the audience how they feel about the topic beforehand, and then hopefully they will get some more information from the speaker, and of course the speaker can also reflect on the input that he sees. So I would invite the first poll question to come up. Yes. So the first poll question, I'm going to relate that to the first speaker. Our first speaker is Ruben Demets, and he's from the University of Ghent, the Professor Ragard group. And Yeah, in my opinion, it's one of the university groups that is the furthest ahead with looking at this, particularly into mechanical recycling. So we're very happy that Ruben is here, and he's particularly going to set the scene from the general point of view. And he's going to talk about the quality, and the quality has everything to do with characterization. So let's see what comes into this question about what does the audience think about characterization of those polymer grades that are now starting to emerge in the mechanical recycling. So we're starting to see some answers come in. Let's see if we get some more in. And it's quite bimodal, so answer C is also popping up. So we're seeing a lot of answers, basically that is very important and that it's a real challenge because there might be some lack of data. Moderately important. And not so, okay, so quite clear. With that, I want to invite Ruben to deliver us his presentation.
Yes, thank you, Jaap. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ruben Demets, and I am a PhD researcher in the research groups of Professor Kim Raghart and Professor Steven de Meester of the University of Ghent. Within these teams of these two professors, research is focused on the pretreatment and actual mechanical recycling of waste plastics. And the first 3 years of my PhD focused on the deodorization, separation, and processing of complex plastic waste streams, such as the plastic fraction of municipal waste. At the moment, I am working on 2 projects. The first one is a European Interreg project, Plasticity, which looks at recovering plastics in urban regions. A second project is a DPI project, Q-Corp, in which we are trying to establish a quality model for contaminated polyolefins. And about the challenges and research in this last project, I will elaborate today. Next slide, please. So the plastic family is one large group of diverse polymer types, and each of these polymers is characterized by its own properties. However, if we zoom in further within a single polymer type, there is, as most of you will know, a large range of different polymer grades available. And each grade will be used in a specific application or applications according to its functionality. This slide shows the different types of polyethylene, which, despite the fact that they consist of the same monomer unit, have very different architectures. And even more so that within each of these types, an enormous variety of grades are available, which differ in, among other things, chain length, branching, and percentage comonomers used. Next slide, please. As mentioned, each of these grades is produced to use in many different applications. AGP is particularly good for the production of bottles, pipes, crates, and caps. The more flexible Ldpe or LLDPE is mainly used in all kinds of films, flexible bottles, household products. And from the presented figure, it should be clear that these grades can differ a lot in terms of mechanical and processing properties. Next slide, please. In a sorting center, these plastics are sorted according to type, and so it can be understood that each of these sorted fractions are actually a mismatch of all sorts of plastic grades whose properties can greatly vary. And previous CPC session gave more insight into the sorting. And the efficiency of a sorting machine is often below 100%. And this, as a result, the plastic fractions are cross-contaminated with other types of plastics. And this cross-contamination also occurs because the polymers are physically not separable from each other, as is the case, for example, with multi-layer products. Other polymer or non-polymer contaminants, like adhesives and inks, may also be present in the fraction to be recycled. And these contaminants can have a detrimental effect on the properties of the recycled resource, can produce a dark color or even cause a bad smell. Next slide, please. So it's therefore clear that these 3 issues can lead to an unknown quality of a plastic fraction. And this holds true both before and after the actual recycling process. Contaminants require the proper pretreatments, and without knowledge, these contaminants remain present in the stream. Another question that is important is which is the more suited option for a particular waste stream? Is it mechanical recycling or is it chemical recycling? And even with the right recycling methods, recovered plastics remain complex. And little is known about the impact of the mixture of grades and the presence of contaminants on their functionality. And knowing the quality of a recycled resource is necessary to be able to be used to use them optimally in new applications. Next slide, please. So assessing the recycling quality of plastics relies on two things. First of all, the influence of contaminants on the properties of the target polymer must be estimated. And secondly, a proper scoring system has to be set up, which brings together the important properties. And to evaluate the quality, a number of elements needs to be estimated or determined. So the composition in the first place of the input material and the yield of the recycling process. And those two are mostly known factors or can be determined in a relatively easily way. More challenging is estimating the functionality of the actual recycled material, because this functionality is highly dependent on the intended application. So it's necessary to build up a good knowledge of the key properties required for a certain application. It's also necessary to weigh up whether the properties of the recycled material need to be sufficiently high or low to allow to be used in those applications. In addition, it is of course also important that it is possible to manufacture the product in question, and so the flow properties of the secondary raw material must be as desired. Next slide, please. A first important part of evaluating the quality of end-of-life plastics is predicting their properties. The composition of the stream to be recycled is at the heart of this. And this composition incorporates an enormous source of information based on the products present in the waste flow. A lot of information can be derived about the architectural characteristics of the plastic grades present. An analysis of the composition also gives us insight into the polymer and non-polymer contaminants present. And these pollutants have a direct influence on the flow behavior of the stream. And then after reprocessing, a microstructure is obtained in which it must be established what influence each contaminant has on the final properties of the recycled granulate. And on a fundamental level, it must be made possible to explain these influences on a macromolecular level. Slide, please. So one of our publications concerns explaining the occurring macromolecular influences of polymer blends consisting of two plastics from the polyolefin family. In this work, binary blends of PP, AGP, Ldpe, and Ldpe were made using an injection molding machine. And the changing properties under the influence of a tensile load were then explained by the occurring interactions between the different polymers. Attention was also paid here to the altered degree of crystallinity and the morphology. Next slide, please. If you're able to predict or measure the properties of the recycled plastic, it is further necessary to score these properties in order to achieve a good appreciation of the quality and functionality of the plastic material in question. And however, this is not easy due to the strong application dependency. We are faced with a mix of subjective and objective criteria. For example, a product must not only meet strength or stiffness requirements, but it must also have the right color or transparency. The use of a recyclate also means that the product may not suddenly have a bad smell. And each of these properties, whether they are objective or strongly dependent on the user, must also be weighted up against each other in proportion to their importance. For example, stiffness will be important for a bottle, while ductility must be high for a film material, for example. And to gain more insight into the requirements of applications and to identify the key properties per application and the relative importance, a good application properties matrix is essential. Next slide, please. On this slide, I show a small example to explain this concept. Suppose we have a recycled HDPE and want to use it for the production of either a film or an injection molded product such as a crate. Based on the application properties matrix, it should be possible to distill the distribution of optimal values for the key properties for a specific application. And scores can then be obtained from the individual distributions. And this simple example shows that high scores are obtained for this recyclate, for modulus and MFI for the production of a film. And on the other hand, the recycled material here clearly has a too low modulus and inadequate flow properties to injection mold a crate. So we are currently finalizing a publication on assessing the technical quality of recycled plastic, taking into account the specific application. Next slide, please. So predicting the properties based on the composition should allow us to monitor the improvement in functionality after additional pre-treatment steps. And in addition, it can provide us with insights to adapt product design to the later recycling of the product. And if we are able to calculate one uniform factor for the range of possible applications, it allows us to evaluate recycled plastics for their potential use in a certain application. This quality factor can also be used to make more accurate and correct calculations in LCA, MFA, and TEA studies on recycled plastics. Next slide, please. So this was my presentation. I would like to thank you for your attention. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to ask them in the chat or to contact me by mail. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ruben, for this nice introduction. Some of the things will come back in the next question on the poll and also in the presentation. Indeed, as Ruben said, we're not going to take in between the questions to answer them, but please feel free to put them already in the chat, and Ronald will monitor that as well. And we'll come back to that in the panel discussion at the end, or also in the spin-out rooms later in the network app. Let's bring up the second poll question. And I have to explain the title a little bit, as you can read it a bit differently than maybe intended if you're not careful. So we're going to look at this flexible polyethylene, one of the newer streams on board that waste managers and recycler companies try to market and work with, but it has limitations. We all know about food grade limitations. We will come back to that in a minute, but here I'm asking for non-food. So we're saying we're taking the film, we want to make it back into a film product, real circular. But it doesn't have to be a food grade yet. Still, there might be limitations. One might think of odor, as Ruben has expressed. Gels for the processability, gels for the final properties, and optics. Okay, for now we see a nice even spread over B, C, and D. Let's give it a little bit more time. Okay, now we also see an answer in A coming up. I think people are still answering based on the percentages that we see and the discretization of that over individual people. Yes, I think we're slowly starting to converge to most people having responded. And we definitely see that the gels may result from various things, as Jan will explain in a minute, are dominant, particularly for the processing That's a current opinion of the panel, with some even spread over the others. So that's a good introduction for Jan. Jan Kolijn is working at Tusti High-Tech Recycling. He's the CTO there. We're slowly moving from academia to industry, like Jan has done himself, because Tusti, in effect, is a result of a collaboration between the Eindhoven University and its tendency to spin out promising technological developments, partnering with Stiphout. Stiphout Plastics, Stiphout Recycling. They are the winner of the 2016 Chemistry Startup of the Year by NWO Top Sector Chemie en Innovatie Link. And since then, I've been following them closely as we work together in the ProDefects project. And they're really looking for this high-tech recycling of various types. I invited Jan to speak about the ProDefects project, which is a nice example of the value chain where we work in a Dutch government sponsored project, precisely aiming what we talked about in this poll question. Can we take the flexible film household waste and bring it back into another film application? With that, Jan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Jaap, for the kind introduction. So indeed, Tusti is a high-tech recycling company, and what we try to do is bring the knowledge that we gain at academic level to the recycling cases. And well, one of the difficult waste streams to treat is Ldpe, so films. Because they are so thin, it's really difficult to clean them well, and they can also, because they have such a large surface area, it's very easy for them to get a lot of material still left on them, which may hinder the recycling. As Ruben indeed mentioned, that will be a problem for many applications. So what we try to do in this project, what I will talk about, is bring the entire value chain of film people together and try to find solutions on a very pragmatic level. So if we can go to the next slide, I can introduce that cycle of Ldpe. So we start on the top with the collection. So at a certain point, people get rid of their waste. It's collected. After that, it's sorted by specialized companies. In the Netherlands, there are only a few, let's say 4. After that, after the sorting, the washing takes place, which happens on really large scale, and leaves flakes. Well, these flakes, they are still almost dry, they're almost clean, and then via compounding, the next step, they are taken to the next level, which hopefully is good enough to produce a film. After the film has been produced, you go to the product, which is packaged. Of course, also there we have requirements. The film must be strong enough, the film cannot smell too much, it must be printed. And if everything is successful, it goes to the consumer. The consumer uses the material, and in many cases, especially in film, it's only a very short while that it has been used, because it's mainly used in packaging. The consumer throws it away in the trash, and hence it comes back to the collection. So there you have the complete cycle. Now, if you go to the next slide, this cycle, well, it is determined by many stakeholders, and everyone has its own specific requirement and its specific influence on the quality and on the amount of material that is obtained. So if you, in the animation, if you click on the next one, yes, then this part of the chain determines the quality. So the collection, if done well, can also help in obtaining the right quality. So it really matters a lot whether we have co-mingled, so all household waste together, which also means all dirty stuff, all smelly stuff, or that it's the waste is collected via specialized systems. So only films, for example, which is done sometimes, well, would be perfect to obtain the best quality material, but of course it's very expensive, because that would mean that people in their households would have to have at least 20 different waste bins for collection. Well, that's of course not perfect if you look at your own house. So there is an optimum there. And after sorting, also the sorting quality can be made really high, but that means it would be really expensive. And the same goes for washing. You can wash your material 10 times, and with every washing step and with every cleaning agent you would use, you would improve your washing. However, if you do it too often, then you will end up with a lot of maybe chemical waste, but at least you will use a lot of water, you will lose a lot of energy, and it doesn't mean that it will bring you closer to the quality you need. Well, compounding is then the last step. There you can add a lot of material to make sure that your quality in the end meets the specification of the film producer. If you go to the next part of the animation, there we have the people that in the chain that demand the quality. So they want to have a film production process which runs continuously. And because film is so incredibly cheap, it must mean that there, well, it's simply not allowed to have a production stop because there would be some small problem with your material, which means that the input specifications are quite high and quite strict. And also, of course, if you want to package your product, you want to make sure that that happens as smoothly as possible. And that would mean if you would have a perfectly flat film, that is much easier to package and print and seal compared to a quite bumpy film, or a film that sometimes is a bit thinner than on other places, which means that it would tear quite easily. So also there we have the interactions in the cycle that, well, here you already see that the quality that is determined in the red cycle really determines how the people in the green cycle will react to your material. And then we have the last circle, the last part of the animation. That's where the consumers are. So that's the purple circle, and that's where the optics will play a major role, and also the smell of your packaging will play a major role. But also the awareness of consumers plays there an important role, because some consumers really desire a recycled plastic material. They want that their material which is sent to them via bol.com is not sent in a perfectly smooth bag, but which they will throw away anyway. They want to have a low quality bag which really looks recycled. And also the policymakers, and that's the last part, they also have a role there in, well, making regulation that will make sure that one of the that the Ldpe in the end will be recycled in the way that should be, and that they demand that recycled materials are used in these type of applications, depending of course on the type of applications that we are talking about, because that's the major thing in packaging. Food grade materials are really well, they are just really far away from the specification that we can meet now. So in this presentation also we will also always talk about non-food applications. If you go to the next slide. There we see that all these effects and the quality and the effect of the property on the quality can be determined by this entire cycle. So as an example, I just want to take you into the smelliness of plastics, which I believe is a bigger problem than the poll suggested. So at first we start at the source. Is it your Ldpe, is it taken from PMD, household waste, or from commingled materials? Because that really determines how much dirtiness the film has seen before it enters the washing step. Now, of course, after that you have perfect washing. You can wash 3-4 times, but in the end, people also want a material which has a price level that is close to virgin, so you can't spend too much money. You can treat your material that you want to compound, for example, by smell masking agents. They are there, but also they come with a price. After that, you can treat your compounded material, for example, with a heat treatment, to make sure that all the volatile materials that are still left on in your material, even after the compounding step, are removed slowly. Well, that is something that can be done on that side of the circle. But also in film production, you can, well, maybe accept a certain smell, or you can take preventive measures so that the smell during production, which is the worst type of smell, because there you heat your Ldpe to maybe 230 to 240 degrees. And you can imagine if you heat a smelly material, the smell will not become less. Preventive measures, for example, using extra suction may help in accepting more smell, which does not necessarily have to hinder your application in the end if you send it to the consumer. If the smell would still be there, so if it really would be a problematic smell, you can think of only using that recycled plastic in packaging for smelly products, for example, fertilizers, or use it only in outdoor products so that the wind will take away much of the smell. Well, all these type of solutions can be used to still be able to use post-consumer Ldpe into a nice and decent product, and at least start your application of recycled materials in consumer materials, which is still not happening that often. So if we go to the next slide, I can take you to some people that are trying to do that in this project. So first we have the collection. That is done by Atero, one of the people in this project. The logo will show up if you press on the next part of the animation. Yes, and then Atero also does the washing and the compounding. So in the end, they do quite a large amount of this circle, which is very easy because not too many stakeholders will make finding the right application and finding the right balance and quality easier. So after that washing of Atero, I think we can go to the film production. Oh no, the compounding, that's done by Dow. So Dow is the partner that adds virgin materials of well-known quality to make sure we can achieve the right quality for the film production. That is done by Roelands Plastics and Roelands Packaging. And in the end, we use that film in Pocon, which is a producer of fertilizers and of potting soil. Now, this circle is helped by the Eindhoven University of Technology and by Tusti, which does the experiments, and the Eindhoven University of Technology does all the modeling that is necessary to find the optimal balance between application and adding not too much virgin materials. And of course also what the effect is of washing, of compounding, and of film production on the quality of your material. So if we go to the next slide, we have the goal that we want to achieve with this project is really to find applications, two types of applications for Ldpe packaging film from household waste. One is a single layer film extrusion that's been used for Pocon fertilizers, and we want to really go to as high as possible content of recycled materials. And the second application is a multi-layer film extrusion, one layer containing recycled content, and the other layers are the layers that make the material as strong as possible to make sure that the potting soil is packaged in the right way. There the goal is to have a minimal recycled content of 30% in the entire film. If we go to the next slide, I can give you some, well, the requirements that we have set. So of course we need to have sufficient mechanical strength. That makes sense because you want the package to withhold the content. It should be sealable, which makes packaging a lot easier. It should not be thicker than the virgin packaging because packaging taxes are quite a large amount of money that's been spent by the packaging sector for every kilogram of material that is sent to the market. It cannot be more expensive to produce, which means the production speed should be as high as compared to virgin. Well, the outside does not have to be white. Well, that also helps. because white materials are really difficult to produce from recycled materials, but it still should be white enough to be printable. And then the last requirement is that it should be stable for at least 1 year of storage outside. So there should be some UV protection. Yeah, that's the most important one. There should be some UV protection. If we go to the next slide, I can show you some results that we have obtained. So we made a first film from Atero regranulate, made it into a single layer and a multi-layer material, and looked at, well, what is the quality now? Do we achieve what we want? So this is more or less a base case after the first years of experiments. And what you see is that the single layer film can be made from 100% of recycled content. That does give a acceptable production speed at Houlder's packaging, even down to 40 micrometers thickness. The mechanical strength of that film is okay, but it's a bit lower than virgin. So, well, we need a bit of improvement there. Sealability was okay back then, and printability is not okay because of the gel particles. One of the main issues that were identified in that production run was the smell. It was, well, for Houlder's packaging, it was not acceptable even. So we have to do something about that. If we have the multi-layer materials, then we see more or less the same. Of course, you use less PCR, so post-consumer recyclate. That helps in having better mechanical products, better printability. And of course, the smell is partly covered because the outer layers are there to keep the smell in. So multi-layers are easier to produce than the single layers, which makes sense in this case.
Jan, 1 minute, please.
Yes. If we go to the next slide, I can show you some of the ways we have improved this. So first, we did an extra washing step in the Atero washing procedure to make sure that the smell could be decreased. We also had improvement in the wastewater treatment, just to make sure that the starting water before it enters your washing step is cleaner, which also helps in odor prevention. We added some antioxidants to make sure that your quality is improved, and also added some virgin resins and compatibilizers to make sure that we meet the right quality that is desired by Houlder's packaging. And after that, we even did a thermal treatment to minimize the smell. So we keep this material for a few hours at high temperature to really remove the volatile components that give you the smell. The results of this are expected this year. So we are really hopeful that the table that I showed you in the last slide will improve a lot, which was already good, by the way. I was not that, well, depressed when I saw these results. Actually, I think that they are quite okay, and that we should be able to make a decent film in the coming year. I don't think we have much time for the next 2 slides, which were just some indications on what the type of experiments that we do, just to show you examples of the type of materials that we have. I think this one is a nice one to show you, that we follow the quality of the Atero regranulate in time. And what you see is that we have more or less constant MFI over this entire year, and have also constant modulus, which means that there are no seasonal effects, which was quite surprising, actually, at least for me. I would have expected that, for example, in the spring, that you would have much more packaging from potting soil present in your materials, or that you would have well, just different types of packaging depending on the season. Well, as you can see from this graph, that's simply not true. With that, I think we can conclude this this presentation. On the next slide will be the partners, and of course the big thank you to Top Sector Energy for funding this project. If we have one more animation, then I think the Dow logo will also appear. Yes, thank you.
Okay, yeah, that's not so important. Thanks a lot, Jan. And yes, let's quickly move on to the next poll question that will introduce this. So Jan has been talking about quality, and yeah, there are revolutionary new techniques on the horizon that we can still associate to mechanical recycling, and dissolution is one of them. And this question is about it. The presentation will be about it as well. So think about this a little bit. 5 years from now, what will be the role of dissolution technologies in polymer recycling? And it has promise, but it will take much longer. Yes, it clearly improves the quality and will be a significant add-on to the classical mechanical recycling that Jan Kolijn talked about. It will only be needed for multi-layer packages that are quite complex. The sorting infrastructure will not be tuned to the needs of this technology, which is a more negative scenario. While you answer this question, let me introduce Dr. Marc Roelands from TNO, who's an expert in this field of dissolution. I've gotten the pleasure of getting to know Marc in one of these incubation projects by the Dutch government, PEC-CE. And yeah, there he already showed some nice results on dissolution, and after that he has taken that much further with his team. So I think we're still waiting for a few answers here, so let's wait for them to come in. Okay, nobody is currently so negative to think that the infrastructure will not be tuned to this. So we're seeing the majority of B, and Marc, you can obviously reflect on these results. So with that, let's give the floor to you, Marc.
Thank you, Jaap. Thanks for this introduction. Let's wait a second till the slides come up. Yeah, the topic of this talk is dissolution, and the question is whether this is a beneficial addition to mechanical recycling. You can see here, I got the impression sometimes that plastics are disappearing, at least from the viewpoint in the supermarket. What I got here is a jar with a nice cardboard sleeve around it, and in there's this clean, it's clear polyprop jar. And this disappearing of the plastics from the viewpoint, this hidden plastics, I think has to do with perception. Next, please. I made a table which is fully arbitrary, only based on my own opinion, and it has to do with perception. And perception of plastics is not so well. There's littering, plastic soup. If you compare to paper, cardboard, that appears okay. It's bio-based, biodegradable. Glass is inert, so it should be okay as well. And yeah, tins, cans, littering is the problem maybe. And also added some real figures from the Afvalfonds Verpakkingen. Next, please. And then I added two columns, one on the recycling process, the severity, and one on circularity of the product. And if you think on plastics and mechanical recycling, it's actually quite a mild process. And you, at least for the PET bottles, you can have circularity. And for a lot of other plastics, we can go to secondary applications. The upcoming route, thermochemical pyrolysis. It's a feedstock recycling, so you can go back to virgin grade. However, at the cost of carbon efficiency, which is not that great yet. And yeah, the alternatives, repulping is mild, but always downcycling. Cellulose fibers become shorter. While for glass and metals, yes, you can go back to the original grade, but at the cost of a high temperature process with corresponding CO2 emissions. Next. The dissolution process explained. What is it? From left to right in this scheme, waste plastics are dissolved in a hot solvent. The resulting solution has a low viscosity, so conventional separation technologies like microfiltration and sorption can be used. And next, from the clean solution, the polymer is precipitated and the solvent is recovered. Next, please. And this is in practice, it looks like this. In the fume cupboard from left to right, there's the dissolution vessel. In between, there's the purification section. And on the right, there's the vessel for precipitation of the polymer and recovery of the solvent. Next, please. And we apply at TNO this technology for two groups of feedstocks. One is the multi-layer polyolefin films, and the other one is the multi-material engineering plastics, as we call them. Plastics from waste electronics, like HIPS and ABS, polycarbonate, and also commingled polymers, like carpet polymer fibers or thermoplastic composites. Next, please. For the first class, the first category, the multi-layer film packaging, this is the project PAC-CE that Jaap was already referring to. And here we looked at multi-layer films with different polymers. And the objective here was to recover the polyolefins, while the insolubles, PET and PA, had to be separated. And what we noticed here is, for example, that the print and the tie layers stayed on the insolubles in our case. Well, we moved on from this project. Next slide, please. And we moved on following the trend in the industry, design for recycling, moving to all polyolefin packaging. Here we work with Sabic and with the Brightlands Materials Center, our colleagues. And at TNO, we looked at the dissolution. We are still looking, this project is ongoing, on can we remove odor, maybe a bit of color, maybe some of the gel forming materials from these all polyolefin multi-layer films. Next slide, please. And the following step is an EU project that will start June 1, and that is with European RTOs and different partners. And here we like to address the question, can we also go back to food contact grade? And of course, there are a number of aspects here, like sorting and detection, maybe even tracing back the origin. So filigrade from the Netherlands is involved here. And there are aspects like what solvents to use and what's the effect of it. So this will be starting in a few months. So next, please. From the second category, the second class, these engineered materials I got here from the Plus to be Clean project. That's an ongoing European project. And here we have partners over the value chain, starting with Coolrack as a collector, sorter, and Electrolux as an end user, and in between the materials producers. And the objective here is not only to recover the styrenic polymer, HIPS or ABS, but also the brominated flame retardants and the adjuvant, the antimony trioxide for reuse. So next, please. And part of this kind of projects is evaluation. Partially it's the techno-economical evaluation, where we look at the processing cost and the investment cost, and impact assessment. And here we work with our colleagues in Utrecht. And I got here from their peer-reviewed publication a comparison for processing methods for ABS. And the incineration is compared here with pyrolysis and other thermal processes, and also with dissolution. And surprisingly, the dissolution came out quite well. And you can see it on the right here. The blue bar is the CO2 emission for the product, so that's the same for all technologies. Yellow and gray is the processing emissions, which are for the solvent process still quite high in this, under the assumptions that we make here. But the advantage is in the high percentage of polymer that can be reused, so the avoided emissions. So we can move on to the next slide. This is our roadmap. This is where we come from, where we want to go. We're now at TRL 4, and the next 3 years we like to scale up a bit, but also make our process more continuous, also to bring implementation closer. Now, where are we then? Next slide, please. We're not the only one, and certainly not the front runner at this moment. There's more groups working on this. So I come now with a kind of parade of the state of the art. So next slide, please. This is the actual front runner. It's in the Netherlands. It's polystyrene loop. Plant is under construction in Eindhoven, 3 kilotons capacity, and the objective is to recover polystyrene from demolition waste and to remove the outdated, the abandoned flame retardant. Next, please. The process of polystyrene loop is based on the Creasolve process from Fraunhofer in Germany. And Fraunhofer themselves, they have been active for 20 years in this field, and they're further developing, building a pilot plant for PVC and also one for packaging. Next slide. Also in Germany is APK New Cycling. This company is also having a dissolution process for polyolefins, for film. And they're using in their patent, they mention the use of methyl cyclohexane as a solvent. Next slide is PureCycle in the US. This is a technology that was initiated, supported by Procter & Gamble. And it's quite special. It's based on supercritical butane as a solvent. And there's a number of companies that have connected, that have participated in this. And the PureCycle company, this spin-off company, now plans to build a number of 50 kiloton plants. And I think they're listed on the stock exchange where they collected funding. The next one, it's dissolution of polystyrene, also in North America, Quebec. And the idea here is that you put your expanded polystyrene in a jar, in a vessel with this solvent where it dissolves, so it reduces the volume. Next, please. This is in Spain, a company that dissolves the PE lining of PET trays. Next, please. And then there's in the Netherlands 2 companies working on this. Obotech in Rotterdam on plastics recycling by dissolution, and Recycling Avenue in Delft. So the next, please. Then we come to the, let's say, the former front runner of this technology. It's not always a success. Viniloop, developed by Solvay, is an operation, a plant that ran for 16 years in Italy, processing soft PVC, and it closed down. And on the website, it was mentioned that this is because they cannot remove the phthalate plasticizers from PVC, which are no longer allowed in the recyclate. So it shows the importance of the purification. So the next slide. So what's the role of dissolution? Here you got a picture of the value chain from feedstock over use to waste processing. On the right, you see the arrows, the recycle arrows, reuse, mechanical recycling with closed loop and open loop, chemical recycling, upcoming, depolymerization, pyrolysis. Next, then the animation. The dissolution fits in here. Next, please. Yeah, and you get, this is how I see where the role of dissolution as an add-on to mechanical recycling. It can help you to bring recycled polymers to a quality that's good enough for the reapplication. Next slide. And then I come back to my table, and now there's another category added. That is the mechanical plus physical, the dissolution assisted mechanical recycling. I still believe this is quite a mild process, but now with the option to go to a quality that can be applied in circular applications. And yeah, I think this is a addition to the existing or upcoming technologies that are already available. Next slide. So this is the final slide. And if you like to read more, there's this publication together with Utrecht University. They submitted it and we contributed from TNO side. But thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Mark, for this great overview. I didn't know there was so much going on in this parade that you showed. It's very interesting, and we look forward to seeing stuff become more and more commercial and scaled up. So moving on to the final presentation of today by Jan Bruys, led in by this poll question. Is this going to bring us also to food contact, or are more things needed for that? And Jan will have share some of his company's ideas there. So the topics of cleaning and recycling, will they enable food contact approved mechanical recycling? Well, options for you to choose from. Chemical recycling will always be the preferred method of food grade, period. That's it. Or, well, there is promise here, but we're far off. There's a lot of R&D needed to get to a breakthrough. Answer C, it will work, but mostly for limited closed loop streams. Or answer D, yes, it will work, even for flexible packaging waste. Okay, see the first 4 answers have come in. While the answers come in, let me introduce our final speaker, Jan Bruys from KraussMaffei, company well known for processing technology, for extrusion technology. Really amazing to see how extrusion technology, which I guess started in the 19th century, is still maturing and is getting tuned to also this challenge that we're talking about in this conference. Let's see. Okay, so not so optimistic for the flexible packaging so far in the answers. Of course, the answers are not always mutually exclusive, so you'll have to pick the one that you like the most, obviously. We're getting to this 22, 28, 50. So still quite some people that think it absolutely has to be chemical recycling, but that's about a quarter of the audience. Okay, with that, let's close the polls for today and let's move on to Jan Bruys. Jan, please take it away. You may be on mute, I don't hear you.
Yeah, sorry for that. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. That's just because I'm becoming very enthusiastic by hearing these kind of things by the speakers in front of me. Ruben, Marc, Jan, listening to what you said, all the kind of things where we are working with on the field of extrusion. So getting the materials from different approaches from customers, being processed on our equipment, the challenges we had over the years. So I myself, I'm roughly about 30 years in plastics processing itself, and being challenged in recycling since the last 15 years approximately. We had the adventure starting somewhere in 2003, in between, where a customer, the large, let's say, key account from my side, was starting with a processability of a post-industrial polyamide spin fiber. And the material we got from them was a spin fiber bale. And the spin fiber bales had to be made into a, let's say, close to virgin compound with introduction of glass fiber and mineral filler. And we succeeded to do that in a two-step process, which I want to show you in the next coming slides. So next slide, please. Well, this is from Fraunhofer. Fraunhofer has been mentioned before, a little chart showing the complexity of the different recycling processes and streams, where to go, what to do. On the right side, we very closely see that is starting with sorting. Well, in the past, incineration and landfill. That's well, a little bit out of the game, of course. Then we go to the left to the first step, recycling, mechanical recycling. And mechanical recycling for many people is just, let's say, making a conversion from a film of a flake into a pellet. That was challenging us to say, yeah, hey guys, listen, extruders can make and do more than only that. So why not taking the next step by only not taking the conversion into a pellet, but doing further steps with that melt phase we have already in the extruder, without, let's say, having a next step, putting energy in again. Then very nice, the promises we got, and it's already mentioned then at the last speak by Marc, the dissolution process. After we were talking to many companies in the past, only looking at mechanical recycling, the solvent-based recycling started to come up. And I can already confirm we have already lines doing this live on high capacity base. So it's nothing just saying it's only on, let's say, lab scale or pilot scale. We are doing this already on a production scale, lines being in use for the solvent-based recycling. Up to capacities, we are talking about 6 tons an hour and more. Challenges we get from recycling were in the past, people think about, hey guys, listen, we do 1 ton an hour, we do 2 tons an hour. No, nowadays we get even inquiries going up to 15 tons an hour. So there is a big step going forward in the market of recycling, and people are not looking at only, let's say, making a pellet out of a recycled stream. People are looking for quality, and that's why we are getting in the game to do that on our extrusion technology. Next slide, please. So left side, we see the mechanical recycling possibilities we have. One is called our Edelweiss recycling. That's on one extruder, and this one extruder can do a compounding step by feeding the material, by melting the material, by getting rid of the moisture, and then repelletize it. Then the next step below that is Edelweiss compounding. The Edelweiss compounding as such is the additional step to be taken by doing that on the next extruder as a tandem arrangement and making an upcycling stream, making final compounds to be directly reused in final applications. At the right hand side, you see the solvent-based recycling, for different polymers. We have solvent adding processes, like for PET with the glycolysis process, and we have solvent degassing processes, which more or less fit a little bit to what Jaap just told, that we have to degas the residuals coming out of that process on extruders. Next slide, please. So this is a simple, let's say, picture of a mechanical recycle line, where at the left side you see our plastification extruder, where the feed of the feedstock is based on rigid flake and agglomerated films, be fed on the extruder, being molten, being degassed, being filtered by laser filter technology, and that stream of melt we feed in the second extruder, the cascade, where we can add then mineral fillers, glass fibers, additives, and make a final compound in one step. Next slide, please. So mechanical recycling challenges we have seen over, let's say, the last 15 years then. So first was to change the shape. We have flake, grinded flake, we have films. So the grinded flake with a bulk density of 0.3, 0.35, that's easy to feed in the extruder. But nevertheless, the extruder needed to be adapted to that. Then we have agglomerated films, so the very thin films Jan was talking about. We get them washed, we get them cleaned, and then we make an agglomeration step to allow them to be fed into the extruder as good as possible, in line with cutter compactors. And we have a cutter compactor being equipped directly for a twin screw extruder, so different what others do. Recycle feedstock contains water from washing. The pre-washing being hot wash or cold wash. There's always a big difference in both technologies. What means that the water stream coming with the flake or with the film needs to be taken out of the process, and we do that with degassing steps on the extruder. The recycled feedstock contains smell. Everybody is talking about smell. We have a nice approach. We are already making a melt in the extruder, and as virgin polymers are processed on coming from big reactors, and we know this from Ldpe, the melt phase is coming into a big single screw extruder, and we know there we have some residual monomers containing inside, and we already learned 25 years ago we want to take these out by stripping, and stripping is nothing else than adding a stripping agent like water, CO2, or another one, nitrogen, into the melt phase of an extruder, distribute this in the polymer matrix, and then extract via the vacuum system after that this low molecular component, and that can be dragging out a lot of smell out of a polymer. We have learned, for instance, linoleum in PE packaging. We could reduce by stripping more than 50% of the odor just by melt degassing and adding some stripping agent. So that's, I think, for a lot of people a big step, and it's, let's say, when you already melt the polymer, it's almost for free to do that step. You just have to learn how to do it. Recycled feedstock contains contaminants. These contaminants being in there can be, let's say, polymer contaminants, but also others, sand, wood, paper, whatever is in there. We take that out by special filtration technology. Laser filters being made for a continuous filtration of polymer streams are on the market, and we use them. Melt viscosity, very important. What you do up front is you mix as much as possible your polymer streams, like already has been shown before by Jan. When you look over the time, what is the viscosity of the different streams? As long as you gather enough and mix them enough, the stream will be pretty in line over the time. You have to do mixing, and what we do on our lines is we install an inline rheometer to measure this viscosity. And when you do, let's say for instance, by polypropylene melt shifting, the feed of peroxide to do that, we can already, let's say, measure the melt flow index over a continuous rheometer, and then correct this by the peroxide feed at the beginning of the extruder. So also these kind of things with quality are working, and we have it available. Color control, one of the last topics mentioned, and also with Jan being able to print it. It should not be white, but it must be white enough or not colored enough or not gray, too much gray to be printed again. We have there are inline color measurements by measuring the melt. That's one of the suppliers being able to do that. The other one is collecting some samples of pellets frequently over time, mix them, put them under a scanner, and the scanner tells you what the color is, and with this information we can correct color on lines. So a lot of things we have been challenged for, and a lot of things we have found an answers, but we are not there yet. Next slide, please. So this is our Edelweiss setup. This is a line we have installed for development phases for our customers in our lab in Eindhoven. And there our customers can come to challenge their products to come to a final quality of product needed for a final application. At the right hand side you see a cutter compactor, which is installed and in line directly with the feed on the extruder. So thin films can be processed here, but even expanded materials like EPS and other polystyrenes which were used for packaging materials. Fed on the extruder has a vacuum degassing, the extruder has a melt pump followed by a melt filter for recycling, so a laser filter. At the end of the line we have an inline viscosity meter or rheometer, and the first line we can have a underwater pelletized material coming out of that, or we bring via a melt pipe the melt stream in the second extruder, where we can add reinforcing, where we can add mineral fillers, where we can add polymers or further additives needed to come to a final compound quality being able to be used in the final step of processing. Next slide, please.
2 minutes, Jan, if possible.
Oh, okay. So just the words are mechanical recycling is living, and we are doing a lot to support our customers to come to a final good quality. Solvent-based recycling, or the nice word dissolution process, used by Jaap. I think it's a nicer word to be added there. Next slide, please. The characteristics of the polymer, like bulk density, viscosity, shape, etc. That's an intake of a feedstock, and the only thing recycling for us is there is a change in feedstock. It's not a virgin material, it's another material. So whatever. Try to make out of that what you need to make out of it. The solvent characteristics like viscosity, molecular weight, dissolvability, etc. is very important. And there are different ones on the market and different processes in progress there. Throughput capacity on extruder design, on scale-up of extruders is important there. And then when you see the next topic, solvent concentration, before and after. We want to come with a quality on the market that the residual solvent is as low as possible. And we have different processes and extruders to do that in 1 step or in 2 steps. The design of the vacuum system being attached to this is very important. And last but not least, processing temperatures, ATEX zones, safety, of course, is important in this setup. Next slide, please. This is the typical glycolysis process for PET. So we melt a PET with an IV 0.65.7. We add the glycol. We bring this IV down to 0.2 to 0.4. And that melt stream is fed via a pump into the finisher, into the reactor again in the second step, and being part of 20-25% of the mainstream, being processed as a real used material again. Okay, next slide, please. This is an extruder, a twin screw extruder, having a rear vent, having 3 steps forward venting to get as low as possible from 30% of solvent back to 2%. The next slide, please, otherwise time is running out. And this is showing that we can also come from 30% down to 0.1% by having a tandem setup, first extruder being able to get out the flash degassing steps, and the second one, a single screw, going down to a very low residual content of solvent of 0.01%. Next slide, please. So again, we are challenged also in future to go to recycled materials for be processed in food contact applications in a very wide range. We have the technology to do that. Either is based on, let's say, mechanical recycling in combination with stripping and other applications, or it's a dissolution process. Both are on the path, and I think the recycling of plastics is an ongoing thing where many, many years in the future we can work on. Thank you very much. I hope the time was okay.
No, perfect. You know, it's always so interesting that we could talk for hours, but fortunately we have the session after 4 o'clock where we can all break out into the rooms and talk in a lot more detail. Thanks a lot, Jan. I think it's amazing to see how much is already possible and becoming possible through all these partnerships. So I see a slide now how we continue the session. So Ronald, I'm not sure if you want to make a comment there, otherwise we move on to the panel discussion.
I think we can move on to the panel discussion, but there are a couple of questions we could address. Maybe, but none of the questions was directly for Jan Bruys of KraussMaffei.
So they will come in right now, and maybe we can take them, let's say, from the top, from Ruben, and then go down. And I'm sure there will be questions from Jan at the end of that. And I also see a few of them are actively being discussed in the chat, so that's also fine. But yeah, I don't know if you can guide us through maybe from the top.
Yeah. So a couple of questions have already been answered by our speakers. And last question, which is now in the publication, is in relation to somebody who would like to stay anonymous. If physical recycling is something to add on mechanical recycling, how do you think the waste should be sorted? One stream for physical and another for mechanical. I think this is probably a question to Jan Kolijn. Or maybe to Marc.
And please unmute if you want to answer it.
Yeah, Marc Roelands, TNO here. If I look to the current sorting system, we have the public part, the Suez, KSI, Heerenveen. And you see that we already do a sorting on the DKR level. But after that, there's the private companies, the processing companies, that actually do the further sorting and separation. Not only NIR techniques, but also float sink technologies, wind sifting. And I think that's the area, for example, where you can, if you take a look to the film fraction, where you can already make a further subdivision, sorting into Ldpe and PP film and multi-layers. I can imagine that these further sorting, these fractions, also can undergo different processing trajectories, different routes in the mechanical recycling, and optionally, like a multi-layer, if you can recover the polyolefin from that, that adds to the available quantity of polyolefins for mechanical recycling. I think that's, as I see it, this further sorting typically is like companies, Atero, Cedo, but also QCP, companies that are already processing the DKR, the pellets, the bales of that coming from the public sorting facilities.
Well, thank you. There is another question. Also, somebody who would like to stay anonymous, but the question is, with solvent-based recycling technologies, would there be no thermal degradation of polymers at all? Maybe also for Marc.
Yeah, good question indeed. That's one of the aspects we are looking at as well. So far we do testing of our polymers coming from these dissolution processes. And I must say that this kind of information is still coming in. The indications we get here is that IV MFI is not so much affected. So we think the polymer chains are not so much affected by this process, at least for some of the materials that we have tested. From literature, I see there's other information as well, like with ABS, for example. So I would say this is in progress research.
Okay, thank you. I think those were the questions at this moment, Jaap. So
I see one question that Jan commented on, but it was really also directed to Ruben. So I want to give Ruben a chance. It's a little bit more at the top of the Q&A, and where Jan Harm is asking that he would be interested to see what University of Ghent could add in this collaboration. I think that is the Prolifex collaboration in addition to the TUA. So Ruben, maybe you can comment on that. Of course, yeah, that is an ongoing thing, but in general, maybe we can generalize the comment. And how do you see different academic groups in the landscape emerging, and what are just the pros and cons of the different groups? Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that, Ruben.
I think that collaboration between different universities is always interesting for research groups, because yeah, if the knowledge that is in each research group, and if it's shared between the different groups, then you see different angles of view about those mechanical recycling topics. And also, of course, if you share the labs between different research groups, there is a lot of possibilities for using equipment that is available in one university that is not available in another one. So yeah, I don't really see negative parts or negative sites for collaborations between universities.
I may add to that from the Sea Planet perspective, which is one of the nicer European partnerships here, training young researchers to become PhDs and become the next thought leaders in this field. And yeah, if you see the complementarity there of the different groups ranging all across Europe, but also all across the value chain, you know, people looking at business models, people looking at more technical things, and the whole variety, people looking at getting the waste back out of the ocean and doing something useful for it. You nice to see the complementarity, but also how people inspire each other, because it's really a field where you think like, okay, it's a bit of a dirty thing to certain scientists, and we really have kind of the ambition to show people that it may be so, but it's a super relevant field, and it's actually a field where great science and technology can be done, you know, and published, and the typical measures that the academics would care about. So I would really invite those in the audience that also have an ambition in that direction to contemplate that further. With that, I think indeed we're slowly getting to the time where we should give people a little time for a little break before the spin-out sessions start. So I want to thank all the speakers here for the excellent contributions. I want to thank you as audience for attending, and hopefully you enjoyed it, and don't hesitate to give us or any of the speakers your feedback afterwards. I hope you will join us for the next sessions and also for the 4 o'clock post discussion. And with that, I give the word back to Roeland.
All right, thank you, Jaap, for very gently and also very professionally moderating this session. Also, from my part, I would like to thank the speakers, but also, of course, you for this nice session and giving quite some interesting overviews of various technologies which are in development. Some still very much at lower TRL levels, and others already a little higher. So now we are going to continue to the network session, and so stay around to connect. So you can go to the Meet the Speakers area in the network app, and there you can be present and part of discussions in the various virtual rooms. So I would certainly ask you to go to the network app section of the planning of the program. You see that here on the screen. So we have various virtual rooms. Also on the other session, which is being held by Graham Houlder of CEFLEX, and there he's joining with Joachim Quoden. We have a virtual room where Jaap and Doelder, together with Jan Kolijn and Marc Roelands, are present. So you can have interesting discussions with them. And also have a room with Mike Jefferson and Felix Bezzati in relation to the other session. And then in relation to this session, I will be present together with Ruben and Jan Bruys in the other virtual room. So please join us in these virtual rooms, and I hope you have time reserved for that. Then in relation to the rest of the conference, so I think that should be the next slide. So we are now on the 8th of April. So our next session is planned on the 29th of April, where we have 2 sessions. One related to product stewardship. This session will be moderated and also organized by Plastics Europe. And then we have another session related to chemical depolymerization and solvolysis, and that the session before, one back, yeah, so this session in relation to progress in chemical depolymerization and solvolysis, there we have Josse Kunst of Cure Technology and Fabien Lambert from IFPN Accents in France, and Dirk Verdoes from Solix, and also we have a speaker from another company, which is not on this visual yet, and this session will be moderated by Jan Jager, who is a lecturer at NHL Stenden and has a long experience, especially in relation to polyesters, and is also very active in recycling. So this could be a very interesting session if you are interested in that topic. And the other session is a session on product stewardship and especially the ways ahead. As mentioned, this is moderated by Circular Plastics Europe. And there we have 4 different speakers who will be addressing this topic together with under the guidance of Anne-Gaëlle Collot from Plastics Europe. So please, the next slide. Okay, I think this was it for today. I'm sorry for that. So please join us in the network app in the virtual rooms, or you can connect and in the on the network app on the individual connection. So look forward to see you there, and also hopefully we will also see you in the next session in 3 weeks' time. Okay, thank you very much.